Crimson Desert released to a pretty mixed reception, with one of the biggest offenders being IGN giving it a 6 out of 10. Apparently that score alone was enough to trigger a small-scale cultural collapse online. Since then though, the game's reputation has shifted pretty heavily in the opposite direction. Some players now praise its open world, with some people calling it the best since Red Dead Redemption 2 and others even saying it surpasses it. But somewhere along the way, the conversation around the game stopped being just about the game itself. A huge part of the discourse became centered around shove it to the critics and proving them wrong. And look, I'm not exactly rushing to defend IGN here. Their reviews can be all over the place, but at the same time, the almost religious level of praise surrounding the game has gotten a little ridiculous too. You've probably seen titles like, "The industry doesn't want Crimson to succeed, they hate this game. Witcher 3 director ends the debate." This kind of conspiratorial framing and drama farming about some nefarious "they" who don't want Crimson Desert to succeed fits neatly into a victim narrative, where true gamers fight back against the establishment. But setting aside all the smoke and mirrors and inflammatory rage bait, let's see how good this game actually is on its own merits, and whether the open world really is the best we've seen since Red Dead Redemption 2. If I were to summarize the open world of this game, it would be a mix of that classic Ubisoft design, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Breath of the Wild. It's not quite as good as the games it borrows from, but still manages to capture a bit of that sense of wonder and adventure. So let's get into it. The open world itself is huge, and while I'm not the type to get easily impressed by how massive a lot of open world games try to be these days, this one is actually pretty remarkable. You can look way off into the distance and know you can actually get there on foot. Those big impressive views are absolutely stunning, with a ton of variety between the different regions. From a technical standpoint though, it's a real mixed bag. Overall the game looks quite beautiful, especially with the lighting during the day and at night that really makes everything stand out. Unfortunately, the occasional pop-ins and weird artifacts can ruin some of that beauty. It gets even worse in interiors where everything looks pretty atrocious. The only way to fix a lot of that is by turning on ray reconstruction, but that absolutely tanks your frame rate in half. On top of that, the textures on certain objects like buildings and ruins feel incredibly boring, plain and repetitive. It's like someone just slapped a flat coat of white or grey paint over everything. I'm sorry, but that's not how real ruins left out in nature actually look. They should be covered in moss, dirt, grass growing through the cracks, all that stuff. A lot of these places just feel way too clean and sterile. Now, Crimson Desert overall may be a technically impressive looking game, especially from a distance when you get those wide, sweeping cinematic shots. You can tell a lot of effort has gone into rendering physics and sheer visual density. But once you look past that surface level spectacle, it's not a particularly artistic looking game. In fact, it ends up feeling surprisingly bland. The color palette is safe, the lighting doesn't seem to make many bold or expressive choices, and overall it lacks a strong visual identity. It looks real, but not necessarily memorable. And I'm sorry, but I really can't keep getting excited about how realistic water looks anymore. At some point, obsessing over reflections, fluid simulations starts to feel like missing the point. Yes, it's technically impressive, but it's also kind of shallow as a talking point. If you contrast that with some of the shots we've seen so far from Fable, the difference becomes pretty obvious. Fable feels curated. There's intention behind the lighting, exaggeration in the shapes, and a more deliberate use of color. Video games are also art, and yet so much of the discourse is driven by "look at this water." It reduces the conversation to pure technical fidelity, as if realism alone is what makes visuals meaningful. But realism without strong art direction just blends together. A lot of these hyper-realistic games start to look the same, because they're all chasing the same realistic look with no strong art direction. The weather effects are nice, don't get me wrong, especially the wind and all the little particles flying around, but overall it still feels a bit lacking in that department. I was really hoping for more variety, like proper foggy days or actual heavy storm. There's no point comparing it to Red Dead here. That game is in completely different league miles ahead. Okay, enough of the complaining for a second. One of the things that kept me really engaged while exploring, besides the environment itself, was the way the game sometimes throws these little unexpected moments at you. Like the time I stumbled on Pororin Village and got hit with a sleeping arrow out of nowhere. That led into this fun little side quest where I had to help some kids retrieve an item by climbing a giant walking tree. Moments like those, even if they're pretty rare, add a ton to that feeling of genuine adventure. Other highlights for me were these spots I'd find where you use the lantern to recreate little glimpses of the past and slowly figure out what happened there. I only wished these sections were longer, offered more context, and built towards something more substantial. There's a lot of missed potential here. As you keep wandering, you'll quickly notice the world is packed with these occupied enemy camps that need liberating. Sounds familiar, right? These camps come in different sizes, but most of them are stuffed with hordes of enemies. Since the combat is so damn fun, I actually had a blast cutting through them at first, especially once I unlocked a certain ability that felt like having a grenade in your pocket. But after a while, clearing these camps turns extremely repetitive and tedious for a few reasons. First off, there's a serious lack of enemy variety. It doesn't really matter if you're fighting bandits, soldiers, or goblins. They all act exactly the same. Even the brutes and more aggressive generals just kind of blend into the mess. Because of that, there's almost no strategy needed. You just throw yourself in and hack and slash. The only enemies that felt a bit different were the flying ones that forced you to switch to the bow, or some of the weird ones I ran into in the forests. I kept thinking back to how the Batman Arkham games handled big fights by mixing in special enemies that actually required you to use different combos and moves. Crimson Desert has a ton of cool movesets, but I never really had a reason to learn or use most of them, since the basic stuff gets the job done just as fast, sometimes faster. The layout of most camps is pretty basic too. There aren't many hidden routes or clever gameplay opportunities to mix things up. Stealth isn't really an option either. I mean, you can try sneaking, but it's obvious the camps weren't designed with that in mind at all. It feels like an afterthought that's missing the basic mechanics to make it actually viable. I really wish they had focused more on quality instead of quantity here, because so many of these camps end up feeling copy-paste with nothing much going on. No extra story, no world building, nothing, and yet they take up a huge chunk of what you discover while exploring. I also kept hearing about how many bosses the game has, but I barely ran into them out in the wild. Aside from the ones that sometimes show up in certain camps, I hardly ever encountered any roaming around. It would have been way more interesting if some of them just wandered certain areas, like the dragons in Skyrim or the griffins in Dragon's Dogma. Now let's talk about the Red Dead Redemption side of things. While exploring, you'll come across short random events, usually someone who needs help or saving. At first, these do a lot for the world, making it feel alive and unpredictable, like something unexpected could pop up around any corner. Unfortunately, these events start repeating very quickly and lack creativity. Take the ambush scenario. A woman asks for your help, only for it to turn out to be a trap moments later. I ran into that exact setup at least 3 times, and every single one played out identically. No twists, no variations, nothing. Compare that to a similar event in Valhalla. Same premise, someone lures you into a trap, but after defeating the bandits, you actually get to explore their hideout. You'll see victims and bodies piled up, a few notes scattered around offering extra context and backstory. The escort missions suffer from the same repetition and lack of variety problem. You rescue a hostage from bandits and walk them back to the nearest village. The NPC will ramble a few words, and that's it. It reminded me of the roadside encounters in Red Dead Redemption 2, except those came with little self-contained stories and genuinely memorable NPC dialogue along the way.
See, my husband... well, it's just me and my boy now, and it's hard to find work.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
A good opportunity.
Crimson Desert doesn't come anywhere close to the abundance and variety in these open-world events scenarios as Red Dead 2 is, or Valhalla.
I shall follow you, record your great deeds with poetry. When danger rears its ugly head, Eivor running from the past with mighty speed to flabbergast.
When it comes to side quests, the game is a mixed bag. Some have clearly received more attention, the faction quests in particular are better presented, and at least attempt to tell a story with proper build-up and decent cutscenes. That's probably why people hype them up. However, even those tend to follow a repetitive structure, padded out with tedious puzzles, fetch errands, or an excessive number of outposts to clear. A lot of these side quests don't have such an interesting story to begin with or some unique twists along the way, but serve as an excuse to send the player into another enemy camp that needs clearing or to defeat a camp leader for that particular camp. To be fair, some of these bosses can be quite challenging and lead to a cool fight, but I really wished more effort was put into the actual plot and story, so I would get at least a little invested. The rest of the side quests, though, are pretty bad. Most are basic fetch quests that can be resolved in under a minute. Even when the premise has potential, it goes nowhere. A woman believes there are ghosts haunting a town. Your task? Fetch some holy water and bring it back. That's it. A man wants you to check whether a cave is safe in case of war. You walk in, find the cave, and that's your quest done. Over before it even began. And look, I don't mind fetch quests in principle. In Skyrim, even the simpler ones would take you through interesting dungeons filled with lore, environmental storytelling, and sometimes entirely new areas to discover. Crimson Desert has none of that. Just generic caves you'll walk in and out of within seconds. But there's one more issue I haven't really seen people talk about much. A lot of these side quests are locked behind main story progress. Skip ahead and you'll just be walking through villages with barely anything to do. Now gating content behind story progress isn't new. Red Dead 2 and Witcher 3 do it too, but in those games the main story is actually worth following. Here it's kind of the opposite. The main story is a painful, confusing, disjointed mess that you have to slog through just to unlock open world content that has nothing to do with it anyway. And that creates a weird problem. The game technically lets you go wherever you want, but there's little point in doing that until you've made enough story progress. So you're not really free to roam, you're just being funneled through a main quest you probably don't even care about just to unlock the stuff you actually want to do. The game also borrows a few other systems from Red Dead 2, but they're not nearly as well developed. The crime system, for example, is kind of a mess. In Red Dead, if you kill someone in the middle of nowhere and a witness sees it, they'll actually run off to report it, giving you a decent window to get away, or even take them out before they can talk. In Crimson Desert, after threatening someone, if you don't leave the area, you get fined. The victim doesn't have to run off to report it or alert anyone. They can just stand there, and somehow the guards are already aware, like there's some kind of telepathic crime reporting system in place. There's no visible cause and effect behind the punishment. Even worse, if you kill the victim, the fine still remains regardless. There's no witness, no report, nothing that logically explains how the crime was registered. Yet the system still penalizes you. And that's the thing with Crimson Desert. The game throws a ton of activities and systems at you, but most of them feel hollow because there's little to no meaningful reason or incentive to actually engage with them. Nothing substantial has been built around these mechanics to make them feel rewarding or integrated into the overall experience. Take Skyrim as a strong counterexample. If you want to roleplay as a thief or assassin, the game fully supports and encourages it. You can join the Thieves Guild with its own storyline quests and hideouts, or the Dark Brotherhood for contract killings. These factions aren't just checkboxes. They come with dedicated gear, unique weapons, perks, skills. Stealing, sneaking, and murdering feel purposeful because they tie into progression, story, and role-playing depth. In Crimson Desert, you can stealth around, hide in haystacks, pickpocket NPCs, and pull off some assassinations. But even that is very limited and contrived since some abilities are only unlocked after certain chapters. Also, clearing a camp with dozens, if not hundreds of enemies like that is excruciatingly tedious and slow. All these features end up piling on top of each other as a long checklist of stuff you can do, designed more to impress in trailers and previews than to deliver engaging gameplay. It becomes a collection of shallow, disconnected mechanics that players drool over at first glance. Look how many things you can do, only to ignore them after a few hours because they add nothing meaningful to the loop. This kind of design creates an illusion of depth while leaving the game feeling surprisingly empty once the initial spectacle wears off. The Breath of the Wild influence shows up in the puzzles you discover while exploring. What Crimson Desert does better is that these puzzles are actually built into the environment instead of teleporting you into some bored, empty chamber. Each one has its own unique look and setting. What it does worse, though, is the puzzles themselves. They're often not very intuitive. You spend a lot of time just standing there wondering what the hell you're even supposed to do. It feels more like a test of patience and bashing your head against the wall than actual smart problem solving. Breath of the Wild communicates the goal way clearer and then leaves it up to you to figure out how. In Crimson Desert, I'd sometimes think certain abilities should obviously work, only to find out the solution was something totally different and kind of arbitrary. Another problem is that these puzzles make exploration start feeling predictable. You see a cool looking ruin or spot and get excited, then realize it's just another of one of those puzzles, and the reward is almost always the exact same thing every single time. A lot of these locations also don't have any story attached, even though they easily could. I remember finding these deep underground ruins that looked mysterious as hell, and I got really invested into wondering what secrets they might hold. 40 minutes later, I realized there was nothing there. No unique boss, no special enemy, just another annoying puzzle with the same generic reward. The whole journey felt incredibly disappointing. That word, disappointing, kept coming up for me when I'd explore these places that looked full of promise, but ended up having nothing interesting going on. So much wasted potential. In the similar fashion, the Frozen Tower left me just as disappointed. Seeing that from a distance was quite a spectacle. I was extremely intrigued, wondering what secrets it might hide. Well, not many, unfortunately. Aside for some of the flying enemies I encountered in that area, there's not much to do there. Just climb those annoying slippery stairs and light up some candles. That's it. Crimson Desert's open world feels incredibly shallow and underdeveloped compared to other major titles in the genre. It lacks the strong, cohesive artistic direction you see in Elden Ring. At the same time, it doesn't offer the richness of world events, emergent storytelling, or lived-in detail found in Red Dead Redemption 2 or even Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The narrative side is also very weak compared to something like Kingdom Come 2 or Red Dead Redemption 2. The storytelling here is disjointed and lacks emotional weight or strong character development. On top of that, the puzzles tend to be more frustrating than rewarding. They often feel like tests of patience rather than logic or creativity. There are moments where you can see glimpses of ideas inspired by these other games, small pieces of systems, storytelling, or design, but they feel scattered and disconnected rather than part of a cohesive whole. In the end, it comes across as a collection of borrowed elements, without a strong unifying vision tying them together. Because of that, it's far from the revolutionary open world experience that some people keep hyping it up to be.